From Tel Aviv, you're watching Israel Update, Israel at War. And with me is Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, Mr. Mike Doran. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Gadi.
Last week, I spoke here about how the atrocities of October 7 threw Israel back to diaspora days where Jews were huddling in some corner, a knife in their hand, and at the mercy of others. And then came this essay by Ron Prosor, whom we both know, Mike. You know him well too. One of the leading Israeli conservatives, who said that far from it, this was a demonstration of what Zionism is and what Israel is, because Ron Prosor said, and no community has ever, Jewish community has ever responded in such a way to a pogrom. And he did not refer to the collapse of institutions or the lapse in the response of institutions like the IDF, the state in general, the General Security Service, Shabak. He meant the citizens. So while the state, he says, was completely absent in those dreadful hours, ordinary citizens, soldiers, reserve soldiers, policemen on Shabbat holiday, grabbed whatever gun they could, jumped in whatever car they found, and just rushed into the fire. And as we start uncovering what really happened there, the stories of braveries are absolutely amazing. I came across a story of a young woman captain named Eden Nimri today, and this woman saved her whole crew because she blocked the doorway for a whole group of terrorists, giving her crew the golden seconds in which to escape, and with her own personal weapon just held them back in front of fierce automatic and grenade fire. She lost her life saving her crew, and the stories like this abound. And Ran writes, on the day of the pogrom, one thing became undeniably clear. Israel is a nation of warriors. We are all warriors, and we will not retreat in the face of adversity. The people of Israel dozed off, but when the day of reckoning arrived, arising from distress and crisis, it woke from its slumber, cast off the dust of complacency, and behold, it is a lion. This essay caught like fire in a Hebrew version. Now it's available in English too, and we'll post it under this video. But first, the headlines. Over to you, Mike.
Okay, Gadi, we're introducing a new segment here, which is the headlines. We've got about 9 or 10 of them. The first being that Israel's bombing campaign intensified, with reports of it hitting an underground ammunition storage depot and what Israelis are now calling the metro. That is, it's the labyrinth of Hamas's tunnels under Gaza. The aim now seems to be to destroy as much of the metro as possible before any major ground incursion. Next, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke with President Joe Biden again on Wednesday. The U.S. is still requesting a delay in ground operations. The rocket attacks in Israel's cities continue, with one direct hit on an apartment building in Rishon LeZion, and another direct hit on an apartment in Petah Tikva. No deaths, but there have been about a dozen injured, according to press reports. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak visited Israel this week. He is the latest in a long line of heads of state, which include President Biden, of course, but also French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, among others. 2 Israeli hostages were released this week, both elderly women with Israeli citizenship, raising the number to 4 out of more than 4 released out of some 200 in captivity. Exchanges of fire on the Lebanese border continue. Along the northern border, the IDF intercepted surface-to-air missiles that had been fired from Lebanese territory at an Israeli Air Force unmanned drone. The IDF I can't say that. The IDF spokesperson's office said that the army returned fire at the area from which the missile, the Hezbollah's missile, had been fired. The Turkish President Erdogan defended Hamas this week. He denied that it was a terrorist organization, and he accused Israel of war crimes. Iran-controlled militias continue to conduct attacks against American military positions in the Middle East. So far, the American military has not responded. The Washington Post reports that President Biden is weighing a response. Finally, China and Russia vetoed an American draft resolution in the United Nations Security Council, which condemned Hamas. Quote, "The draft does not reflect the world's strongest calls for a ceasefire and end to the fighting, and it does not help resolve the issue," said China's UN Ambassador Zhang Jun. At this moment, the ceasefire, he continued, at this moment, the ceasefire is not just a diplomatic term, it means the life and death of many civilians. Back over to you, Gadi.
Yeah, so what will we be discussing here today? One topic on our agenda is war aims. What is the goal of, what is Israel's goal in this war, and can it be achieved, and at what price? I spoke earlier with Ron Prosor, Israel's ambassador to Germany, about the changing winds. Some room for optimism there, the changing winds towards radical Islam, the changing attitudes towards Israel in Europe. And finally, we'll go to Iran and ask, what is the game with intensifying the attacks on US troops now in the Gulf, in Syria, in Iraq, and possibly elsewhere? But Mike, first, you wanted to say something about the Spirit of 48. You're a historian of the region, so you know.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I have some reactions, but of course you're the man on the spot and you really have a sense of how people are thinking. It does seem to me that Israel is reconnecting with attitudes and ambitions and realizations about the nature of the world that date from earlier periods in its history. Attitudes that it probably hasn't been in touch with, or let's say a whole generation has not been in touch with. And these include, the one that I'm most interested in is the need to assert some independence from the United States, a recognition that Israel has friends in the world, but only the friendships only go so far, and some of the most difficult things that it needs to do, it has to do alone. Now, I wanted to get your sense. You said that Ron Baratz's essay was having an impact. Is it having an impact beyond right-wing circles? Is this spirit seeping into the whole country?
Absolutely. First of all, you hear now leftists speak like the kind of rightists that they used to condemn as fascists. So some of the lefties are now speaking in very extreme language. But I think the most noticeable thing is that in wide swaths of Israeli society, a spirit of solidarity re-emerged after the terrible rifts of the now it looks like some faraway discussion about the judicial reform. But this is not true of the elites. So the bickering continues in the elites, and especially, and we should do an item on this one of these days, the media is just can't let go. The mainstream media can't let go of its anti-Bibi obsession. And you listen to it and you think that for them, the enemy is Bibi and Hamas is an opportunity to remove him.
We discussed this before. I think for people out there who are wanting to kind of follow this, the guy to read, and you're not going to like that I'm suggesting that anyone should read him, but the guy to read is Ben Caspit. No, but he's the weather vane for it. I mean, he is. Again, you're the guy on the spot, but my sense is that he is the high priest of the anti-Netanyahu church, and he's laying down the dogma every day. And I actually laugh when I read it. I find it amusing reading because it's obsessive. I mean, there's so many things to be thinking about, and all he can say is "BB." You said before a Ben Caspit article goes Netanyahu.
Blank Netanyahu.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Ben Caspit is a symptom of the problem, not the originator of it. And you can see clearly that they're not really debating the question accountability and responsibility, because they're only interested in Netanyahu's accountability and responsibility. And clearly Netanyahu will have things to answer after this war. He's been in charge for so many years. Our conceptions have obviously been wrong on so many levels. But there are many other people who are in charge. What happened in that night? What happened? How did our army become what they referred to as smart and small? No, it can't be smart and small in this area. It should be tough and big. And so there's a whole generation of generals and politicians who've been completely wrong about this. And had the media really been interested in responsibility and accountability, it would have asked, where was the Shabak, the General Security Service? Where was Amman, the military intelligence? And how did our deterrence erode? And how did we get caught like this on the morning of October 7th?
Let me just run through it, just to reinforce what you just said, a few little facts to emphasize that this was a multi-domain failure, a simultaneous multi-domain failure. So you said Shabak, that's the Shin Bet, that's the internal security, but the internal security is responsible for the West Bank and for Gaza. So the intelligence failure about Gaza falls on the Shin Bet, but the Mossad doesn't get off here because get off clean here because the Mossad is responsible for intelligence coming out of Iran, and we now know the just yesterday, we're filming this on Thursday the 26th. Yesterday, Wednesday the 25th, the Wall Street Journal reported that 500, think about this, Gadi, 500 Hamas operatives trained in Iran for this mission, and nobody picked up on it. Where was the Mossad? So Shin Bet, Mossad. Where was the Sderot? You've told me now. I didn't even realize that Sderot was under occupation for 2 days. 2 days.
It was a battlefield for 2 days.
Where was the rapid response teams? And you can't say, oh, I mean, part of the Netanyahu is responsible for everything that ever went wrong in the country. Argument says, well, that's because the forces were in the West Bank, protecting the settlers, right? But that doesn't answer it. It doesn't answer it because this went on for 2 days, and the West Bank is not that far away from Gaza. Where was the local protection? I mean, I'm just talking about the community protection organizations. Some of the heroic stories we've heard are about the community protection systems that actually worked. But what about all those who didn't work? Who was responsible for that? So anyway, I just want to emphasize that there's nobody who gets off scot-free on this one. No, I don't. It's not my job to hold anyone responsible here. But just looking at it as an outsider, it's absurd to me to try to argue that there's one person that gets more responsibility than anybody else.
I'll only add this, that it's a society-wide failure. It's not even just the army. We have been living in La La Land for too long. There'll be more to say about this, because as I'll try to argue in one of our shows, partly our vigilance was eroded by repeated breaks and checks that lawyers and judges put on Israeli soldiers. There was a horrendous interview with an Israeli soldier on the radio after the fact, and in the beginning of the interview, he found it. He felt he could brag about how moral the Israeli army is, because after the Palestinians broke through the fence, they didn't shoot at the unarmed ones. These people went to slaughter citizens with knives and with their hands. And yet in his consciousness, we are so moral that while this horde of terrorists is crossing the fence, we only shoot at those who hold guns. Instead, he was in a tank. They could have stopped much of it. So there'll be a lot to say also about the judicial system and its role.
I'll tell you, okay, I'm going to tell you something now that you don't know, and it's gonna blow you away. Are you ready to be blown away?
I'm sitting down. Yeah.
Okay. did you know that, while the Israeli army has been for years now conducting operations in Syria?
Yeah.
Did you know that it would never target a Hezbollah fighter in Syria?
Only because you told me this yesterday, Mike,
Oh,
and
I
you forgot.
told you that yesterday. Did you? Oh, duh, I forgot that I told you. Did you know when I told you?
No, I didn't know it. I didn't know.
Yeah, there you
They
go.
didn't tell
So
us.
that also has to be looked at, right? Now, given the role that Hezbollah is now playing in terms of coming in behind Hamas, impeding the Israelis as they try to take care of the southern front, threatening to open it up to a two-front war. One has to ask, why wasn't Hamas degraded, Hezbollah degraded over the last 10 years when there was an opportunity? Anyway.
Yeah, but that's an operational and strategic question. And the question I was referring to was human rights. We're so careful about human
No,
rights.
I'm just saying multi-domain failure here.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's.
So let's look to the future instead of the past and ask about war aims. Mike, if you were to formulate Israel's war aims, what would you suggest?
Well, Israel. I would start. Let me start by saying that Israel is having a problem formulating its war aims, and it has a problem in two. There are two elements out there that are making it very difficult for Israel to decide what it wants to do. One of them is Iran, because Israel wants to narrow the front down to Gaza and go take care of Gaza. And Iran is trying to widen the front. And as an analyst here at Hudson, John Kasapalou said, "Where is the battlefield here? Where's the center of gravity in the Clausewitzian terms of the battlefield? Is it in Gaza? Is it in the north with Hezbollah? Is it in Iran? We didn't ever talk about it here, but Nir Barkat, the minister in the government, said that he threatened to go kill Ayatollahs if Hezbollah gets in the fight. So the Iranians have shot missiles from Yemen, or an Iranian proxy has shot missiles from Yemen, presumably at Israel. And the Iranians are also shooting missiles at the Americans right now. This is to blur the battlefield and make it unclear, to raise the possibility of the battle moving at any given moment to other places. And as we discussed before, the Israelis, one answer the Israelis had is, well, the biggest threat to us, the biggest immediate threat to us is Hezbollah. So we'll go take out Hezbollah, and that way we can show Iran and everyone else that we can move up the escalation ladder and dominate the escalation ladder. But the Americans said no. And so the Americans have focused the Israelis only on Hamas. But then they've shackled, as we've discussed, Israel's hands about what it can do. Can really only take over the northern quadrant of the Gaza Strip, and then conduct operations from there. I think the war aims should still be, as they've been stated, destruction of Hamas, destruction of the leadership, destruction of its organizational potential, but especially destruction of its military capabilities. But this is where Ron Baratz's essay comes in. They're going to have to go back. This mindset back to 1948 has to be a total one. It has to be a military one as well, because Israel has to fight smart. It can't just assume that it's going to have infinite amount of time and support from the United States to take care of what it wants to do. You can see all around that's one of the reasons why I wanted in the news report today, the Russian and Chinese veto of the resolution, and also President Erdogan's comments. International pressure on Israel is going to grow.
Yeah, because you have to take into account the international pressure. There's a picture of Ben Gurion behind you, and Ben Gurion famously says, "Lo meshane ma yagidu hagoyim, meshane ma ya'asu haYehudim." It doesn't matter what the Gentiles say. What matters is what the Jews will do. So we'll go back to Iran, since this is our last item, and ask why Iran wants to widen the fronts. But the Israeli government has defined the goals as dismantling Hamas. Now, in this phrase, there's been you can read a few things into this phrase: dismantling the infrastructure, the military infrastructure, or Hamas as an organization. It was never made It was never made totally clear. But I can tell you that the Israeli public is now grumbling because
if Hamas can still if Hamas can still shoot rockets out of Gaza as it's doing today, it hasn't been dismantled.
yes, but that is not enough. That is, if the only thing we can show for a victory is that we stop the rockets on us, Hamas will portray that or define that as their own victory. Look what we did to the Israeli Lion, and all it could do is stop the rockets. So many Israelis are demanding that the price would be something that would hurt Hamas and the population that chose it enough so that that population eventually gets rid of it itself. For instance, taking back, occupying a large swath of the Gaza Strip, temporarily or else permanently. Dislocating some of the population to the south for a meaningful period of time, paying such a price that the population in Gaza will now put pressure on Hamas itself or on radicals in general to change their attitude to Israel, because otherwise we would be left, so the logic goes, bleeding in the waters without a decisive victory in the language of the Middle East, what Arab countries around us will consider to be a decisive victory and a price not worth paying. We will be left bleeding in the water for the bigger sharks. And here I'll quote a friend of us, Professor Dan Shiftan, who said about the demand that the reaction be proportional. He said it should be decisively disproportional, because only when it is disproportional will it be a deterrent. And might I remind you, Mike, that your country and European countries were in a coalition to destroy ISIS, their response was clearly disproportional. They razed cities to the ground, killing tens of thousands of civilians without the world crying bloody murder. That is because if you want to defeat such a force in this region, you have to make it a decisive victory.
Okay, so but you're saying two different things, and I don't think I agree with either one of them. So first of all, the making Hamas any strategy that has embedded in it the idea that we're going to make Hamas accountable to the Palestinian population, which is going to hold Hamas responsible for its suffering, is a strategy that's unlikely to succeed. We've seen it. We've seen it time and again. We saw it in Syria, that the regime was willing in Syria to inflict untold punishment on its own people, and with no consequence for it. We saw in Iran, different society, not an Arab society, different society, but still the regime's willingness to inflict pain on its own population. And there's never been any obvious consequences for the regime. We see that in Gaza, Hamas rules with an iron fist. It has all the guns. There's not much that can be done against it. So,
but it has all the cooperation. It also has all the cooperation from the population, without which it could not have built its military underground empire.
But and here's so Israel has to take out the fighters, and it has to take out the capabilities. It has to actually go after the organization, and it's going to have to do it smartly, because you're while I agree with you 100% that the United States is hypocritical when it holds Israel to a standard to which it does not hold itself, or has not held itself, and I think it's pretty easy to demonstrate that that's the case. That's just this is a what is it? What's the phrase from the Malian dialogues? The strong do what they will, and the weak do what they must. Israel's a small power. It doesn't have have the choices that a big power has, and it's being restricted by the big powers.
No, but consider Hezbollah. Can Hezbollah take on itself a wide destruction of Lebanon to fulfill its military ambitions? Not so sure. So this is the kind of deterrence we need in Gaza. And also remember that we're talking about a society that glorifies death, that keeps saying that, and it glorifies death for the land. And so I think the way to make it pay in a way that hurts is taking part of the land. But Mike, we'll have plenty of opportunities to discuss this. I know you belong to the party who thinks there's a difference between Hamas and the population, and I belong to the party who says that this population has bred Hamas.
I'm not actually arguing that. Just for the record, we will argue this at some other time, but I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing that that question is the wrong question, because they're what you're up against, and I don't think the Israelis have fully grasped this, is that Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, Russia, China have put together a global political warfare system that is bringing people out in the streets of American universities, right, and American cities to put political pressure on you. And I'm saying that certain strategies by Israel are Hamas already has an answer for. And
you're tempting me. We can't go on with this for long.
Okay.
I'll just say one more thing, is that the amount of criticism, this is a variation on Nixon, right? When I read this in one of your essays, that Nixon says we'll be blamed for sending 3 tanks as we'll be blamed for sending 300. So we'll be blamed for a small number of civilian deaths as we will be for a larger number. And for instance, if we don't do something about Shifa Hospital, underneath which there is the biggest military center of Hamas, then we will not be able to achieve anything. So we are in a bind. I see you have another thought. You
get the last word. Okay, go ahead. Move on to the next segment. Move on to the next segment. No, we will come back to this. It's very important. We'll come back to it.
All right. So next we're off to the European scene to ask if there is any real change there. This is a conversation I had with Israel's ambassador to Germany, Ambassador Ron Prosor. Ron Prosor is Israel's ambassador in Berlin. He was the former director of the Foreign Office in Jerusalem, and also our ambassador in many other places, in the United Nations, in Britain, and elsewhere. Ron, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Gadi.
So are these new winds in Berlin? We heard the chancellor say that any support of Hamas will not be tolerated. People would be indicted for it.
Okay, so Germany, I think, is the only country in Western Europe where all 3 heads of government, the chancellor, the foreign minister, and also the defense minister, visited Israel. Why? Because it's part of what Merkel coined as the Staatsräson. It's German Staatsräson. What does it mean? Israel's security is part of Germany's national security. So in the sense, this is basically saying, okay, you said it publicly, but now you have to implement this. And that's why Germany is really on side on all issues. In the German parliament, the Bundestag, not only speeches, but actually an action plan. What are we going to do? First, we have to look at where we gave our money. Did it reach Hamas terrorists or other organizations which basically work against the state of Israel? Secondly, we have a lot of organizations here in Germany, like Samidun, basically like the PFLP. We can't have them running around shouting death to Jews, death to Israel, and think that this is freedom of speech. No, no, no. And what do we see in Germany? We see in Germany Those guys, by the way, backed by very strong left-wingers, just think, homosexuals, women, I mean, all those who Hamas would behead in seconds, you know, running in demonstrations, chanting, free Palestine from the river to the sea. I think they got it. When they say river, it's the Jordan River, sea is the Mediterranean, in between is Israel, let's wipe them out. So in the sense, you can't, you know, they're saying we can't continue with this. We have to really put a red line, and their calls, A, to really, make it punishable, so they will stand to trial. They have to change the law for this, and also to say, guys, you keep doing this, you are out of Germany. We will throw you out. We won't give you German citizenship. So in the sense now, Germany is waking up, I think, very, very strongly. And what happened really brings, I think, two things together. Things that are happening here in Germany, things that happened when Putin invaded Ukraine, and now Hamas. Germany, a pacifist society, is understanding, you know what, the world is a bit different than we thought or imagined or wanted it to be. We have to be able to protect ourselves, our values, that we all cherish as democracies, and Israel is seen as one.
Because the war in Ukraine reminded Germans that being a pacifist is not a safe program, even in Europe.
So a quick historical thing, you know, Germany after the Second World War under Willy Brandt started what is called the Ostpolitik. And the Ostpolitik was saying we're a bit different than Europe, and hence all those years, basically opened up to Russia, bought cheap gas and oil. It was good for the German economy. And suddenly they found out that this amazing partner that they appeased for many years is not really interested in dialogue. And they woke up from that and understand, A, they have to protect themselves. That's why they bought the Aero 3 system and other systems. Just think, Germany now putting 100 billion euros in order to
upgrade its military.
And not just that, they're now aware that also on the issue of green, and they have to become independent. They can't be dependent on a certain country.
Russian gas.
We have changes also on that. But from my point of view, Israel at this stage, has to really hit back very strongly against Hamas. And I'm saying it, Gadi, because anyone who really wants to have peace, and the whole neighborhood is watching, only if we really dismantle the infrastructure of Hamas totally, we will be able, maybe in the future, to build a better and peaceful neighborhood, because Liechtenstein and Luxembourg are yet to be seen in our neighborhood.
Ron Prosor, our ambassador to Berlin, thank you very much for taking the time for this conversation.
Thank you, Gadi.
Well, that's very interesting what he has to say, and you can see also in the United States, in the Biden administration, there's also a kind of changing picture of the world. It was very interesting to me when President Biden made his speech asking for a special expenditure from Congress for Ukraine and Israel. He had to use the Iran factor as something that tied the two of them together. So there's a picture that is starting to develop among elites in Europe and in the United States of a global coalition of China, Russia, and Iran trying to undermine the American order. But there's one thing at the center of their current conception, or their older conception, that moves against that, and that's the Iran accommodation policy. There's no country in Europe that wants to accommodate Iran more than Germany does. Historically, there hasn't been, and the Biden administration wants to accommodate Iran, and until there's an actual shift in their policy to get tough, then there's going to be limits to how much support Israel is given.
There's also the ticking clock or the running. The sand on the sand clock is running out. You say, is that an English idiom?
The sands of time. The sands of time are running out.
That too.
The hourglass is. I don't know. There must be a
There
phrase.
must be some idiom which you understand what we mean by not using. Then I'd say that there are two separate clocks here. One clock is the clock of military prudence. Israel is collecting its forces. If I can, and I can say this because I don't know, not because I do know, from the recent attacks of the last few days, where Israel has been attacking the underground metro in Gaza, I think we can infer that the kind of bombs that I think the Obama administration was denying Israel, at least some kind of bunker busters are now available. And my guess is that we have been waiting for them. It's not that we thought that this could be postponed. So now, and there's a whole campaign going out in Israel, and it's strange because Ron Prosor is behind that campaign, and everybody thought in the press that it was some devious idea by Netanyahu in order to prevent a ground incursion. And the campaign said, don't risk our soldiers in the tunnels of the Gazan metro. Bomb the tunnels from the air before you send in the troops, or we will have unbelievable casualties. I'll show here a little, you posted on your Twitter, Mike, a Hamas propaganda poster, which shows how dangerous the booby traps in Gaza are. But there's reason to think that the military clock needs to slow down if we want to be safe and thorough. On the other hand, there's the diplomatic clock, which is running out. And it's not just running out in America, it's running out all over the world, and especially in the press. I opened one item that had to do with Israel today on the Reuters website. And of course, there were reports about Palestinian children, about Palestinian mothers, about Palestinian civilians. So the world so easily switches from the barbarians who murder civilians on purpose to collateral damage, which Hamas is creating on purpose. So that clock is running out.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why I say that you're now making the argument. I'm not going to drag you back to the argument we had before, but you're now making my argument. There's not a lot.
What would Ben-Gurion do, Mike? What would Ben-Gurion do? You remember Ben-Gurion defied two superpowers in the midst of a weapons embargo. So I think we have more wiggle room.
That is, careful what you say there. That's not entirely true. He defied them up to a point. He knew one of them was bluffing. The Soviet Union, what you were referring to for our viewers here, is Ben-Gurion in 1957.
In the aftermath of the Suez War.
Yeah, 56, 57, when the United States and the Soviet Union came down on Israel and said, get out of the Sinai, which they had just taken from Egypt, the Israelis, and the Soviet Union threatened nuclear war. So number one, he knew the Soviets were bluffing on the nuclear war. I'm sure it did not feel good to be threatened with nuclear war, but with the Americans,
you need some guts to look that in the eye and say,
you certainly do. You certainly do. I don't know that if I were in his shoes, I would have such guts. But first of all, there's that. Then number two, he withstood the pressure from the Americans, and then he collapsed. And Moshe Dayan, who at the time was the chief of staff of the army, he said to him, why are we collapsing? Because what the Americans were threatening was to put economic sanctions on Israel, and Dayan told Ben-Gurion, we did a study in the IDF and we determined that Israel could withstand those sanctions at least for 6 months. So why don't we fight more? If we're going to collapse, let's at least fight for 6 more months and see what we can get, and then collapse. And Ben-Gurion said and this is what you need to think about now. He said, no, I've pushed Eisenhower as far as he'll go. I can tell. And we're going to need him in the future. This is not the last round with Egypt. We're going to need the Americans in the future. And so I just want to stop here. And guess what? He needed them in the future, and Israel needed them in the future.
So let me respond like this. We have not yet pushed Biden as far as he can go. And Israel needs to remember that it is not a vassal state, and it could also threaten to cause trouble and will not get into which you have the final word, because we're moving to Iran. Yeah.
Okay, I agree. I agree with you. I agree with you about that. But you have to fight you have to demonstrate your non-vassalage in an intelligent way. That's the point. It has to be choose your battles with the Americans very carefully.
So without insinuating that this is the arena where we could choose our battles with the Americans, how about we talk about Iran, Mike? Are you interested in that subject?
I am very interested in that subject.
We said we'll ask what the game is. Why would Iran want to widen the battle or the war into other fields, while the thing it needs to take into account is not to go into a head-on collision with the United States, forcing the United States to abandon its Iran policy? So I would guess, and you are more knowledgeable than me on this, that they would have now, it would have been wise of them to look at the sky and whistle and pretend they have nothing to do with this.
No.
Please explain.
No. So the Turks have an interesting phrase that they use when they talk about this kind of thing. And they say, it's very important to be at the top table. Because in the Middle East is so penetrated by outside powers, and there are so many different little sub powers in the Middle East, and there are different levels of negotiation going on, different levels of contact of conflict, but there's always a top table. The United States is at the top table. So if you're a regional power, you also want to be at the top table. So one of the ways to think about what Iran is doing, there are many, it's doing many things simultaneously, but one of the things it's doing is putting itself at the top table. Its push for a nuclear bomb puts it at the top table. That's an issue that creates a direct negotiation between the Americans and the Iranians, and they succeeded with that. These attacks on the Americans, these are attacks being carried out by we say they're proxies in Iraq, but these are proxies that everyone knows are under the direct command and control of Iran. And they know that. They want the Americans to know that. They're slapping the Americans in the face directly so that the Americans come to them to talk to them. It's kind of what you were just saying a minute ago about what Israel needs to do. It needs to be a little bit, show a little bit of independence from the United States in order to make the United States come and ask it for something, right? So the other thing they're doing, and this has not gotten enough attention in the Israeli press, it's probably too sensitive, I think, hasn't got enough attention in the American press, is they're using the hostage negotiations to get on the top table. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad has 20-some hostages, and that's I don't know the exact number that they have, and
they are under the direct command of the Quds Force in the Revolutionary Guard.
Under the direct command of the Revolutionary Guard, which means that it's the Iranians negotiating over the hostages of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Yeah,
and that puts Iran on the top table. So the Hamas, this is one area where Hamas and Iran are not 100%. Their interests. I don't know. I don't have any insight. Don't have any information about how the negotiations are actually being conducted. But I assume that Hamas is conducting negotiations through the Qataris, and the Qataris acting only as intermediaries here. And the Hamas is looking to get a direct connection right to the Americans, because Hamas wants to be on the top table. But the Iranians, they want to make sure that they have a role in all of this, and that's Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And the Iranians are using all of this, all of the positions that they get on the top table, they're using to convince the Americans to put pressure on the Israelis to stop this thing before Hamas is totally defeated. Hezbollah, by the way, Hezbollah, the Hezbollah opening up heating up the northern front is another way that the Iranians put themselves on the top table, because the only way to constrain Hezbollah is through the Iranians.
So I'll take us back to an earlier part of the discussion we had here, and say that as one Orientalist, or I don't know, a scholar of the Middle East named Eddie Cohen said on one of the shows here, he said, the Iranians don't mind sacrificing the Palestinian people in this war. So in that sense, Israel's war aims, if the center of gravity in the Clausewitzian sense is in Iran, then hitting Hamas hard is not a hit at the center of gravity, because Iran in the larger picture would be willing to sacrifice Hamas and the Palestinian people if it needs to. Remember, these are Sunnis and they are Shiites.
No, that's too crude. That's
why so?
Because okay, look at what just happened 3 weeks ago. We talked about this before. 3 weeks ago, we had Saudi-Israeli normalization in the pipeline. We had a new era in Turkish-Israeli relations in the pipeline. We had a new trade route from India to Europe through Saudi Arabia and Israel, and then on to Europe. Being
there was a new Middle East,
Middle East
forming before our eyes. It's the European Union in the Middle East version was forming before our eyes.
And in one day, it blew up. In one day, it blew up. And in one day, Israel's power and influence in the world was taken down a full peg, maybe 2 pegs. All of that can only happen with the Palestine question. It has a special relevance. Only the Palestine question is going to really bring out people in the streets all over Europe and the United States. Nobody, look at 500,000 Syrians were murdered by the Syrian regime. The Russians dropped bombs on hospitals, bakeries. 10 million Syrians were displaced in the civil war. How many demonstrations did we have by student groups all over America about that? None. So, or very few and small. Nobody paid any attention.
There was no branch of gays for Syrian refugees or
queers
something?
For Palestine. No, there were no queers for Syria out there protesting. So the Palestine question has a special resonance in the Muslim mind, in the Arab mind, in the Western leftist mind, in the Western mind in general. It's just a thing. So the Iranians are very sensitive to this. Plus, look, they don't want to take it's a great asset they have, Hamas. They don't want it to be destroyed.
But they still, first of all, they still have the West Bank and Hamas.
It's not the same.
Hamas,
not the same.
Hamas. The reason there are no elections in the West Bank is that Hamas will clearly win them. So perhaps not, but as to use a metaphor you once used, Iran has many dogs on leashes, and it can afford to sacrifice some of them. Maybe not wholly, maybe not.
It's gonna. You
maybe
watch
not soon.
You watch as Israel goes in. I predict as Israel goes in on the ground in Gaza, the northern border with Hezbollah will heat up more. They won't go to
Heat up or full. Oh, okay.
They won't go. I don't think they'll go to full war, although it could. Once it starts heating up, it could go all kinds of directions, depending upon what the Israelis do. But
that's up to Iran.
Yeah, it's up to all the cards right now are all of the initiative is really in the hands of Iran. It's remarkable.
So Mike, to finish today's discussion, the war in Gaza can possibly demonstrate to the American administration that its policy for 2 decades, except for a few years of Trump in the middle, was completely misguided. Is this going to register with Biden's administration?
Let me put it to you this way. I say there's a 20% chance that 1 in 5 chance that it will. So I'm not betting on it. It's our job. I see it as my job to present that picture to the world. The answer to this problem, the solution to this problem is in deterring Iran. That's the solution. The solution is not the two-state solution or some kind of peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. This is not Israelis and Palestinians. This is Iran, 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 and it's Iran challenging the United States.
And on that unhappy note, we'll
wait. Before you end, I want to. Can I tell you? Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I know you were wrapping up there.
Yeah, sure.
But something very interesting happened.
You've interrupted me on everything today, so you may also interrupt me on this, Mike. Yes, please.
That was very passive aggressive. It's unlike you. You're usually just aggressive. I'm not used to the passive.
No, but I'm Jewish after all, Mike.
Yeah. So you got purveying guilt in your DNA. So so something interesting happened. I just want to call your attention to Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, wrote an article in Foreign Affairs, that's the establishment foreign policy journal, about the president's policies. And the article was written before October 7, and it celebrated the peaceful nature of the Middle East and all of the achievements of the administration. And then the article came out, and it was an embarrassment to the administration. So the online version on the Foreign Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations website has edited it. Now they admit that they edited it, but it's fun. It's fun to go through and look at the changes. But interestingly, by raising my hand, I automatically interestingly, in the new version where they say they've edited, they say they're still wedded to their conception of how to stabilize the region, which means engagement of Iran, appeasement of Iran, and so on.
Regional integration,
regional integration, de-escalation, dialogue, diplomacy, blah 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 blah. They're still, they have not gotten out of that paradigm. You and I look at the region and we say, well, this has to change their mind. No, it hasn't. It hasn't. And one of the main reasons, we'll talk about this another time, is because it's domestic politics. It's not just a foreign policy strategy. It's a domestic political strategy. And look at all these. That's why all of these kids, all of these misguided kids, queers for Palestine, and all of this marching on the street, they matter. They matter because this is a progressive administration.
But also, Iran is not popular with the wider American population. And let's discuss this. Let's discuss universities too, because both you and I come from there, and we probably experienced similar things. And on this unhappy note, we end this episode. And we'll see you soon. Don't forget to.
Yeah, don't forget to share this with all of your friends, and come back on Sunday when we return.